Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will free your prisoners from the waterless pit. Return to your fortress, you prisoners of hope. Even now I announce that I will restore twice as much to you. I will bend Judah as I bend my bow, and fill it with Ephraim. I will rouse your sons, Zion, against your sons, Greece, and make you like a warrior's sword. Then the Lord will appear over them, his arrow will flash like lightning. The sovereign Lord will sound the trumpet, he will march in the storms of the south, and the Lord Almighty will shield them. They will destroy and overcome with sling stones. They will drink and roar as with wine. They will be full like a bowl, used for sprinkling the corners of the altar. The Lord their God will save his people on that day, as a shepherd saves his flock. They will sparkle in his land like jewels in a crown. How attractive and beautiful they will be. Grain will make the young men thrive, and new wine the young women.
We're going to look at this chapter 9 in Zechariah this morning, if you want to look at it with me. I've learned over the last few years that a film enjoyed by someone else might not be my cup of tea. Some people I've met think the most inspiring films are, Polish with Latvian subtitles or something of that nature. Sorry, I thought Megan was staring at me with, like, Grandad, what you're saying. I read the movie reviews in the newspapers, and I've come to realize that if the critics really love a film, I'm going to hate it. One film that I've seen twice that came highly recommended by one of my children and by his friend, and that narrows it down to two, is called Memento. And it's a strange film. It baffled me the first time, so I watched it again and was even more baffled the second time. It starts at the end and then works back to the end from the beginning in a series of little circles. And at the end, I didn't know if I was at the end of the beginning or at the beginning of the beginning. I didn't really know. So I've not tried it again. Now, I suppose really I like books and films that start at the beginning and end at the end. It's a very profound thing to say in a sermon. And because of that, I do struggle occasionally with the prophetic books of the Bible, like Zechariah. I expect them really to behave a little bit like my preferred movie plot. They might not want to be treated in that way. Take Zechariah, for instance. The book is a kind of summary, a collection of preaching over many years by a great prophet, an inspired prophet, and at times he repeats himself. He might return to a theme that he's dealt with before, but from a different angle or using a different treatment. And the prophet may not be moving on to something new when he goes from chapter 8 of Zechariah to chapter 9. He might well be returning to an earlier point in his story, but retelling the same theme from a different perspective. Let me quote, I'm sorry this isn't on it is on the PowerPoint, and those of you at home can enjoy the PowerPoint, but let me quote from Barry Webb, whose commentary on Zechariah is really helpful. Chapters 7 and 8 have been focused on lifestyle issues. What will be the social implications of having God in residence again? How should we live? Chapters 9 to 14 are more focused on events, what may be expected to happen after the temple has been completed in Jerusalem. What shape will the future take as it unfolds? So today what we're really doing is moving from part 1 of Zechariah to part 2. Part 2 runs from chapter 9 to the end of the book. But the second part returns to some of the themes of the first part. But as somebody will point out, whether it's me or not, I'm not sure. I'm focusing mainly on chapter 9 today. I gave up. I realized that the level of my competence deserted me towards the end of chapter 9. So I'm going to focus mainly on chapter 9 today. The general message is a positive one. God's king will come and establish his rule throughout the earth. That's the theme. It's basically the theme of the whole of Isaiah. It may really be the theme of the whole Bible. But on the way to victory, there's a great deal of suffering. There's going to be a great shaking of the whole universe. But the glue that holds everything together is the kingdom of God and the king who is coming. Here in chapter 9, we have a great vision for the future. Now, please remember that the people of Judah, amongst whom Zechariah was mainly ministering in Jerusalem, the people of Judah were at the fag end of many years of national humiliation and military defeat and economic disaster. The 10 northern tribes of the nation of Israel had pretty well disappeared thanks to the Assyrians invading them and scattering them. There were still remnants of all those 10 tribes, but they were no longer a unified nation. They were now something else. The 10 northern tribes had pretty well been scattered. Now, the 2 remaining tribes in the south of Israel, Judah and Benjamin, were in a sorry state. Judah had become a little sub-note in the history of the Persian Empire, a tiny little state that was kind of lurking around somewhere to the south of the Persian Empire. But the great promises of the covenant of God, that the God of Israel would rule the world from shore to shore, from north to south and east to west, that he would rule the world from Jerusalem, from his throne, it all seemed a bit distant, a bit of tabloid exaggeration. So, what's the next prophetic message this preacher has for the people in this bleak situation? The answer is, look, the king is coming. We've heard that before in Zechariah, but now the story is further developed. So my first point, which is no, it's not. My first point is our enemies are conquered, verses 1 to 8 of Zechariah chapter 9. You see the nations that he mentioned. He does a rather surprising thing, this prophet, in some respects, in handling the theme of the defeat of the enemies of his people. The king is going to come. He's going to exercise judgment upon all those pagan nations that have been unkind to my people Israel. He doesn't look at the great power of the Persian Empire. He refers to the smaller but more persistent enemies of the Jews over previous centuries. Some years ago, I went to the casualty department at Kingston Hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning to tell them I was suffering from chest pains. I was pretty sure I was having a heart attack. I was surprised myself by saying to my wife on the A3, will you drive a little faster? I'm not sure that I've ever said that before, and I don't think I've ever said it since. Please, would you drive a bit faster? When I got there, I said, well, look, I've got chest pain, but while you're at it, would you mind looking at the little wart on the back of my neck? And I've got a mouth ulcer. Could you attend to that before you do the ECG and all that kind of stuff? Wouldn't they reply something like, Mr. Tindall, let's deal with the big problem, and then you can go and see your GP about the other little things. But there's something a bit like that going on here in chapter 9. In Zechariah's day, the big presenting problem for the known world was the dominance of the Persian Empire. After that, it would be the dominance of the Greek Empire, Alexander and the Great and all that. After that, it would be the dominance of the Roman Empire. But here in chapter 9, the Spirit of God causes the prophet to focus on the little nations, the little irritable nations. And I'd like to suggest that the message in this is that all those pagan forces, whether small or great, will have to face the judgment of God. Every nation, every community that has set its heart against the God of Israel will have to face his wrath. Doesn't matter whether you're a sinner after the proportions of Hitler or Stalin or whether you're a little sinner in Surbiton or Epsom, it doesn't matter. If you live a little quiet life, but you have separated your heart from the God of Israel, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, you're going to have to face the judgment of God for abusing his glory. So that's what's going on. To the north were Hadrach and Damascus, the capital of Syria. The Philistines are mentioned in verses 5 to 6. To the south you have Ekron in verse 5. On the coast, on the west coast, you have the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon, who were famed not for their military strength, but for their proud financial muscle. By the time Zechariah was preaching this message, these nations were pretty well spent forces. But the Lord is probably using them as symbols for all the nations, small or great, that defy his rule and harm his people. They defy the rule of God and dishonor him by worshipping idols and trusting in riches. So what happens here is in chapter 9, we're presented with God the warrior. He strips Tyre of its accumulated wealth. He strikes down her seagoing capability and destroys the citadel with fire. The king of Gaza also perishes. Ashkelon is depopulated. The pride of Philistia is cut off. Whether you look to the north, the south, or the west, the warrior God comes in fierce judgment. With all the powers that have opposed him and harmed his people, he comes against them with furious power. It's no point in ignoring that. This is the God of the scriptures, the God of the Hebrew scriptures. And the reason why they've harmed the people of God is their devotion to pagan deities and pagan rituals. There's a reference to that in verse 7. If you just glance at verse 7, I will take away its blood from its mouth and its abominations from between its teeth. That's a reference to meat that is offered to idols. Idols that are not gods, but who defy the living God. That's a reference to the feasts that have been offered to these idols, and people are seen as having big steaks and beef ribs in their mouth in honor of some pagan god. And God is saying, I will take away its blood from its mouth and its abominations from between its teeth. You see, God is very jealous, my friends, for his own honor, his own name. The peoples of the earth who refuse to bow down in authentic worship and live in service for him, who worship something else. If you don't make the God of the Bible the center of your inward life and your lifestyle, you'll always put something else at the center, and God will be displeased. And the God who is displeased is the God who holds the oceans in the palm of his hand, who scattered the stars as easily as we close a curtain in our living room. And God says of that something else, that thing you've got your teeth into, that it's an abomination to him. It makes him shudder. It revolts his heart. It's hard for you to think of the thing that you love so dearly, the thing that you are living for, the thing that you're trusting to make you happy. It's hard to think that God is displeased with that and he hates it like a vile stink. But if it's taking the place of God in your life, it's an abomination to him. These nations around Israel, the ones that I've mentioned, they have their splendid temples, they have their magnificent priesthoods, they have their fine clothes, it's all very impressive, their devotion to their gods, but the true God is unimpressed, and he's filled with divine and pure nausea. God isn't interested in multicultural liberalism. That's what this chapter is saying to us. He doesn't subscribe to the belief that all religions lead to God. He doesn't agree with those who teach that it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere. He doesn't subscribe to that in any place in the scriptures. The pagan nations and their beliefs are heading for terrible judgment. I will cut off the pride of Philistia. I will take away its blood from its mouth and its abominations from between its teeth. See, God is a warrior king who will put all his enemies under his feet. It may not look like God is champion in this present world, does it? When you look around, when you have a look at the newspapers or read or listen to the TV news, it may not look like God, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, is the champion of the world. It looks often as if the powers of unrighteousness are in the ascendancy. But it's a promise that he will deal with all the powers in the visible and invisible creation in such a way that he will come out on top and they will be beneath his feet. That's what chapter 9 is saying. He does it in the here and now when he's ready, but one day he will do it fully and completely when the king comes. Then, verse 8, I will encamp at my house as a guard, so that none shall march to and fro, no oppressor shall again march over them, for now I see with my own eyes. So that's point number one. Our enemies are conquered. Do you ever feel an inward rage at the things that are done nationally, internationally? And do you feel rage when a man kills his children and then kills himself? Maybe out of spite for a broken marriage. You ever feel rage when somebody picks up a gun and goes into a school and shoots a couple of teachers? Don't we feel that kind of thing? Multiply it by 100 incidents every day. But the Bible promises that the king is coming and he will sort it out to his own glory. Our enemies and everything that is in enmity to God will be conquered. Secondly, our king is exalted. Our king is exalted. Verses 9 and 10, the warrior king is introduced to us in person. Behold, your king is coming to you. It comes as a surprise in the passage, as Caroline hinted earlier. This is the trouble when you're a preacher and somebody's going to do a children's talk. You think, oh, I'm going to steal all my thunder. Well, it comes as a surprise in this passage that the warrior king's on the march. He's dealing out judgment upon his enemies. But we're asked to behold him in verse 9. He's a man riding on a donkey. God enters his city as a man on a donkey. The picture here is extraordinary. The king enters Jerusalem on a donkey rather than a stallion of war, a big black or white horse. It probably indicates that he comes in peace. He's described as righteous. And like the other kings mentioned in this chapter, he's filled and in his entirety with the character and nature of God. He comes as the bearer of salvation. He's humble and lowly. The Hebrew word is often used of the poor people in Israel. He's humble and lowly. On one occasion, when a great Middle Eastern king entered his capital city in triumphal procession, bringing the spoils of war and victory, his procession lasted 3 days. It was called a triumph. When General Titus had finished in AD 70 destroying the city of Jerusalem and laying bare its temple and burning all its houses and killing hundreds of thousands of Jews, he let the people flock into the city for the Passover, and then he set up a siege. He killed thousands, hundreds of thousands. When he got back to Rome, oh man, they were out in the streets celebrating General Titus. They built an arch, which I think you can still see somewhere, maybe in Naples. There's an arch, a triumphal arch, and it's got pictures of Jewish captives on it. A triumph. Well, here is the king, the triumphant king. He's on a donkey, riding into the city. Of course, it's pointing forward, is it not, to Jesus of Nazareth. He came to Zion deliberately riding on an unbroken foal. He sat himself on a beast he'd never met before, a beast that had never been ridden before, and it peacefully and obediently carried him through the gates of the city. And his followers shouted out, Hosanna to the Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This was his enthronement moment. They thought, now is the time for the son of David to act like King David, drive the Romans out of Zion, establish his throne at the center of the world and world politics and religious life. A week later, he was hanging on a cross with a Roman notice board above his head saying, "This is the King of the Jews." Spit drying on his body, his blood falling in great pools on the ground, his face blackened and swollen with multiple blows to his face by Roman soldiers, a crown of thorns around his head digging into his scalp, his wrists and ankles nailed to a piece of wood. This is the King of the Jews. You remember what he said shortly after he was seen transfigured by kingly glory on the mountain of transfiguration, when the radiance of his heavenly beauty shone so strongly that it shone through his skin and through his clothes? There in this moment of great glory, he said, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, but he will be raised on the third day. A remarkable thing about the New Testament is it picks up on Zechariah chapter 9, verses 9 to 10, and it shows that the victory of Jesus and his kingdom was established in the weakness of the cross. What's going on here? Didn't the authors of the New Testament know how to read their Jewish scriptures? The warrior king comes. He's coming to judge the pagan nations. He's going to establish his kingdom. He's going to ride into Jerusalem and establish a reign of peace and harmony over all his enemies for all time. And yet here's their king. At the end of that week, when he rode into Jerusalem, he's pierced and stuck on a cross for everybody to laugh at him. And his enemies, rather than being overcome, appear to have been victorious. The king hangs there on the cross and he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Surely that's not what Zechariah had in mind, was it? Let me remind you, I won't turn to it now, but let me remind you of Revelation chapter 5. It's a picture of God's scroll of his purposes in history. Who is able to open it? And there is someone who can open it and open its scrolls and put God's purposes into operation. It's this great king. The king who alone can put God's purposes into operation is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. That's how he's described in Revelation chapter 5. But he's also a slain lamb. His bloody death on the cross is the king's victory. And in that redeeming death, he ransomed the people from God for every tribe and nation and people group on the earth. And as the book of Revelation later shows, he won the right to recreate the heavens and the earth in perfection. He's defeated all the powers of darkness and sealed their destiny in hell. And he takes the beast that is the devil and he casts him into the lake of fire. His victory is perfect and eternal and glorious. The death of the king outside the walls of Jerusalem was and is the way he established his reign. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is the Lamb who sits on a throne. And the response of those who understand who this king is and what his victory is like is to shout out, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain. Worthy are you to establish the eternal purposes of God for the universe, because you were slain. And by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you've made them a kingdom and priests to our God. And they, that's you and me, shall reign on the earth." So friends, the day is coming when this kingdom shall be established universally. At the moment, the Lord Jesus, the King of Kings, on the throne room of heaven, he conquers his enemies by winning souls one by one through the gospel. bringing them from the realm of darkness into the realm of light. Each man, woman, boy or girl who turns to Christ is another little victory for the King. But the day will come when the King will return and every eye will see him. Every tongue acknowledge him. Every knee bow before him. He won't come lowly riding on a donkey then, but on the clouds of heavenly glory. Are you ready? Are you ready?